Our Denver Broncos free agency preview continues here on Locked On Broncos. This week we take a look at cornerback. Ladies and gentlemen, the Broncos have several unrestricted free agents. Who do they bring back? And if not, who do they look to on the open free agency market? Maybe a former Denver Bronco could be in the mix to return. You get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked On Network and 9 News. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again, Broncos country, for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Not to mention, you can watch us on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, the free agency preview continues here, my friend. Obviously, Super Bowl week, just a couple of days away, and we're all excited for the big game. But in the meantime, we always have to look ahead. We're forward thinking here when it comes to this Denver Broncos team, a new head coach, and obviously some new philosophies that will be coming forth. So I'm excited to break it all down with you, my man. First things first, starting things off at cornerback.
I'm excited too, Cody. You know, obviously the Super Bowl almost going to be in the books here, and then everybody's going to be full steam ahead on the offseason. So now we get to all be on the even playing field here, but it's all about getting to this game, right? Who's going to get to the Super Bowl next year? There's already 30 teams working on it, and there's going to be 2 more very soon working on it. So the cornerback position, how important is it to George Paton? I mean, we saw last year just how important it is to George Paton. So we can expect maybe the unexpected at this position in 2022. I don't necessarily know. Maybe the Broncos will be big players in free agency. Maybe they won't. They certainly have the expiring contracts to justify, hey, we're going all in again this year.
Well, let's take a look at the free agents now. Unrestricted free agents. These are the ones you always have to worry about. Unrestricted, because they're free to talk with any team's representation once free agency happens. Obviously, there's the legal tampering period, which we all know a lot of these things happen early on. I mean, some of these deals probably already made, and they're like, hey, once free agency comes around, we'll let it out. It becomes official. Guys have an idea as to where they want to go here. But, we take a look at Bryce Callahan first and foremost. One of the key acquisitions by the Denver Broncos once Vic Fangio came over to be the head coach of the team here, and obviously Chris Harris Jr. departed, and so you had to replace the nickel guy, and Bryce Callahan came in. Obviously, familiarity of Fangio's system, but man, when healthy, Bryce Callahan was one of the best defensive players on the field for the Broncos. Now, Sayre, in your opinion, you look at Bryce Callahan and you look at the new coaching regime, and you look at the fact that right now nickel is very undefined for the Broncos. If Bryce Callahan is gone, do you bring him back? Or do you maybe look elsewhere?
I think you got to at least consider bringing him back, right? Especially if you're bringing in a defensive coordinator like Evero, who's coming in and knows the Vic Fangio type of scheme, right? So Bryce Callahan necessarily I don't think he's ever played in any other defense besides Vic Fangio's defense. So there's a chance we could see him go and follow Fangio wherever he ends up coaching in 2022. But at the same time, like you've mentioned on a number of podcasts before this, that secondary, they become a very tight-knit group out there. And you and I were talking before the show, like this is Justin Simmons' group. So Justin Simmons, I have a feeling, is going to be calling his boys, calling Bryce Callahan, calling Kareem Jackson, and saying, hey, like what are we looking at for the future here? What are we looking at for at least this season? And obviously Justin's not the general manager, but at the same time, talking to those guys and talking through plans, because chemistry, cohesiveness, that's crucial for a secondary. You have to be able to communicate. I don't know about Bryce Callahan. I don't know. I mean, I love when he's played. He's been really, really good. And he's been exactly what we all hoped back in 2019 when Vic Fangio was hired. We're like, all right, Bryce Callahan's a free agent. That's a no-brainer. Bring him in to be the nickel, slide Chris Harris Jr. to the outside, and have a great time. And that never happened. We never got to see that. We never got to see those two players together. So I think obviously now with his injuries and all the things that have popped up over the last couple of years, it's really hard for me to say that I would invest more than a 1-year deal in Bryce Callahan in free agency, especially given some of the other names that are out there, potential drafts. You got Michael Ojemudia, obviously on the roster. Where do you stand on this, Cody? I know you're high on Bryce Callahan, so would you bring him back more than a 1-year deal or just a 1-year deal, or would you bring him back at all?
I mean, kind of what we talked about with Melvin, right? Like, ideally, maybe you do get a 1-year market value deal, and it's kind of like a prove it. Bryce's play doesn't have to prove anything to us or to the organization. It's, can you stay healthy, which has kind of been unfortunate because he had the freak accident with the foot, the screw in his foot that got twisted around his bone. He had to get that whole thing, surgery done. Then he had the knee injury. He dealt with a lot of injuries in 2020. And then in 2021, obviously the hyperextension of the LCL, just the injury he had there, but he's able to return and finish out the season. One thing he did do also, he did restructure his contract a couple years ago to help the Broncos because he's like, hey, this is what I can do. I'm not able to play right now due to injury. It's not my fault, but I will restructure my contract. So maybe George Paton does offer him a 1-year kind of prove-it deal here. I mean, I imagine Justin Simmons says, hey, if we want, because he's met with Nathaniel Hackett, if we want to preserve what we have, we need to bring Kareem back. We need to bring, a guy like Bryce back. Now let's get to another guy here, the opposite, Kyle Fuller, who was brought in as offseason acquisition. He actually was the week 1 starter. You have Bryce Callahan on the inside, Ronald Darby on the outside, and Kyle Fuller. Unfortunately, Kyle Fuller really struggled. His biggest issue was really getting in phase, locating the football. And so a couple teams made some plays on him. Do you bring back Kyle Fuller? I mean, I feel like, in my personal opinion, Sayre, I feel like he was more so a Vic Fangio guy, that the reason he came was to play under Vic's defense and have another veteran guy. Outside of that, I can't see any way that he's back with the team in 2022.
I don't see it either, honestly, and that just goes to the point that you just made, Cody. The fact that Patrick Surtain was not in the starting lineup week 1. I mean, if that doesn't scream why this coaching staff is probably gone, that's as good of an indicator as any, right? And not that you. I mean, obviously, in terms of financially, you had the 3 highest paid guys out there at the cornerback position playing those snaps, but at the same time, you want your best out there, and so I think that with what we saw from Kyle Fuller, especially as the season progressed, like week 1, we're thinking, okay, that's got to be a fluke game, right? I mean, Kyle Fuller was an All-Pro the last time he played with Vic Fangio. And then weeks just continue to go by, and he would continue to get beat for big plays. And it was just unfortunate to see. We did get to see him play in the nickel a little bit, right, which he hadn't done before in his career. So he's got that on his resume. Yeah. But I just feel like moving forward, he's gonna have to have a prove-it deal elsewhere this coming season if he's gonna be playing substantial snaps, because I don't feel like he's really gonna be a fit for the Denver Broncos going forward.
Well, I'll go rapid fire right here, Sayre. 2 other guys that are unrestricted free agents. Nate Hairston, who really emerged last season as one of my favorite under-the-radar young players. Ed Donatel, when I spoke to Ed Donatel, obviously he's now with the Seattle Seahawks. Congrats, Ed. We'll miss you here in Denver. Had a lot of raving things to say about Nate Hairston. We saw him step up in a big way in training camp, and obviously he made an impact in the nickel role throughout the season, especially down the stretch here for the Broncos. And then there's Mike Ford, one of the key acquisitions George Paton went out and got to help bolster the Broncos special teams unit. He is a piss missile, as we say, as a gunner. He gets downfield and he tracks guys. I really like Mike Ford. Now, just a simple yes, no. Sayre, would you bring these 2 back? I think that they're young guys. For me personally, when I think about player development, you have to have young guys. You have to have a lot of them. And these are 2 guys I'd want to build with, especially if one can contribute on special teams, which is an area the Broncos have struggled with. That's why George Paton went out and got him. So your thoughts on Hairston and Mike Ford?
I say definitely yes, Cody, on both those guys. Just like you mentioned, you got youth, you got depth, you got special teams upside, and you have improvement that they showed on the field last season, specifically Hairston coming out of the slot. I feel like definitely yes, if you can get those guys back, I would do it.
Absolutely. Broncos country, let us know what you think down in the comment section down below. Who will you bring back? Who would you move on from out of the Broncos cornerback group of free agents here for the 2022 NFL free agency period? But coming up here in just a moment, we're going to take a look at some options outside of Denver that maybe the Broncos pick up the phone and say, hey, can we get you to come to Denver? We talk about who that may be, including a former Denver Bronco, coming up here in just a moment. But first, let me tell you about this sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's our friends over there at the Get Upside app. Ladies and gentlemen, the Broncos country, there's an incredible app for everyone who buys gas that you need to know about. It's called Get Upside. Listeners of Lockdown Broncos, they are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time that they fill up. And all you got to do is just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code TOUCHDOWN for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. Fill up, cash back. You don't don't pay full price at the gas pump ever again with the Get Upside app. Just download the app for free. Once again, use promo code touchdown for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. And some people who drive a lot are making as much to $200 to $300 a year in cash back. And there is no catch. The cash back gets added right to your bank account, and you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon or other brands. All you have to do is just download the free Get Upside app, use promo code touchdown to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's code touchdown. And our good friends over there, betonline.net. Ladies and gentlemen, BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs right before the big game here this Sunday. Super Bowl 56 at SoFi Stadium. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates on current games. So don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, sir, as we continue our coverage on our Denver Broncos free agency preview in today's episode, Locked On Broncos, looking out of market. If the Broncos decide to move on from some guys in-house, there's some interesting names that are out there on the free agency market. Now, obviously, we do know Patrick Surtain. He will be the starter. He's emerged as a bright young superstar. Ronald Darby's still under contract. He's going to start on the outside, unless the Broncos want to move him inside if they do something else. But let's take a look at maybe some guys that could play inside the nickel, Sayre. And there's a former Denver Bronco that, look, there's word out there that he'd be open to returning to the Denver Broncos if, in fact, one coach was not back around. And that is here Chris Harris Jr. Chris Harris Jr. obviously spent some time with the Los Angeles Chargers the last couple of years. I know it rubbed Broncos country, the fan base, wrong a lot of ways because the Broncos and John Elway did give him an offer. There were some other differences, I think, that were going on there. And I think a lot of it was for Chris Harris Jr., maybe the fit within Vic Fangio's defense in and of itself. So would you bring back Chris Harris Jr. by chance? Look, the no-fly zone, I know that thing is come and gone, but Chris Harris Jr. will always have a very strong part of Broncos history.
He will. He will always have a special place in all of our hearts. And I think that's great to hear about the coaching situation, not because of the fact that he left, but just because, remember when he signed with the Chargers, everybody's like, dang, like, I feel like the Broncos could have made him for sure a better offer than that. Or maybe they even did make him a better offer than that. And it was like he was trying to kind of stick it to the Broncos. So I'm definitely on the fence about this. I love Chris Harris Jr. I hope he retires a Denver Bronco one day. All of the memories that we have of him from 2011 through 2020 or 2019, man, it was just amazing to have him in orange and blue and to see the plays that he made. Personally, for me, Cody, and we talked about this in our linebacker preview, I'm personally the type of guy that I look at free agents that are under the age of 28 years old. And so Chris Harris Jr., while the nostalgia effect would be nice, I personally wouldn't bring him back. And that's maybe going to be unpopular in the comment section. I don't know. And I don't know where you stand on this, but I would just kind of say, hey, we had our great times. You moved on. We moved on. And I think there's other players at this position that they could look at. And you listed some really nice ones here, specifically a guy who I think could really fit with Ejiro Evero as he comes in potentially as the defensive coordinator.
Well, and also I use the same philosophy, right? I was trying to avoid the 30, 31, over 30 age here, but looking at some other guys, looking at Darius Williams, who's played with the Los Angeles Rams. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent. Obviously played a little bit opposite of Jalen Ramsey. Could do a multitude of things, play inside the nickel. He could play on the outside. And for some reason, I didn't even think about it, Sarah. Like when I listened, I just said, hey, Darius Williams is a guy that stood out to me this season. I forgot about Ejiro Evero in the sense that, hey, maybe this is the one guy he brings over. Like, hey, come to Denver. We've seen this happen several times, with Los Angeles players coming over to a coach that they have familiarity with. I wouldn't be opposed to this there, but there's also another guy, too, on the veteran market as well, coming up from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He spent some time with the 49ers, and I remember when he was a free agent I believe it was last year or the year prior, I was even saying, like, hey, maybe the Broncos should take a look at him, and that's Ahkello Witherspoon. I wanted to get your thoughts, obviously, first on Williams, but even Ahkello Witherspoon as well.
I love the idea of Williams, especially with coaching connections. Those are always no-brainers in free agency to look at. And I love the idea of Ahkello Witherspoon as well. I mean, I was looking at him last year also, just as, the Broncos are getting into this area of needing multiple starters at the position last season. I felt like you could get him for a really good price. And then I believe the Seahawks signed him and then traded him almost immediately to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So there was a number of teams that wanted him, and he excelled in Pittsburgh. So I like that potential pickup as well. Obviously, then you have other guys who play the slot, like Justin Coleman for the Miami Dolphins. I think he could be an intriguing pickup. I'm looking over the full list of free agent corners, Cody. My goodness, JC Jackson, he'll probably get franchise tagged by
And
the
a
New
lot of
England
money
Patriots.
too. He's going to be in line for a lot of money, especially considering his 8 interception season.
Yeah, and didn't he have 9 last year too? He is just a ball hawk, man. He's got to be the most underrated corner in the league. Another one who's not on the list, but I think should be on the list, Mike Hughes, the former first-round pick of the Minnesota Vikings, played this year with the Kansas City Chiefs. He had 4 forced fumbles this year, Cody, and he also provides value in the return game, so I like him. What do you think about him and maybe a couple of other guys on this free agent market?
Well, you mentioned Mike Hughes as well, and I know that the Locked On Chiefs guys, they are huge on Mike Hughes. Now, his dynamic, obviously a pretty solid tackler, his ability to come in, knock the ball out, right? But what do the Broncos need more of, Sayre? They need guys that can force takeaways, which that's been a thing that even like the takeaways were up for Denver in 2021, but it wasn't to the standard like, hey, you have all this talent in the secondary. You should at least as a unit, you should have 20 takeaways, which, generally it's hard. When you also factor in a pass rush too, I think that, when you look at guys that can maybe play inside the nickel, what do we say about Kyle Fuller when he played in the nickel? One thing that stood out to him, his ability to come up and tackle. That was huge for the Broncos. So Mike Hughes would be a guy that would fit in right away. And look, you get some secrets there from the AFC West, your division rival. Like, hey, what do you guys see from Patrick Mahomes inside practice? What do how do you counteract this? How do you counteract that? That's always an interesting play here. But I do think it maybe, you go with a guy who's a playmaker that's also at the younger side of things. Like we mentioned, you go to even guys like Justin Coleman, same exact dynamic with the Dolphins, a very aggressive style of defense there. I'd be okay with any of those options there. I just tried to stay away. I know that the appealing names of the Patrick Petersons came up, but I just tried to stay away from the older guys just because the Broncos, we can see it's the youth movement. They have a young roster enough as is, and they have a young coaching staff in comparison to the rest of the league. I just don't see them going with many veteran options.
I don't think so either. And when you look at these free agent defenders all across the board this year, I know we'll have future episodes dedicated to the pass rush, future episode dedicated to the safety position. But when you look at free agency this year, to me, the strength is in the depth of the youth at every position group. We're seeing the linebacker position, a lot of really young guys, there's tons of Patriots guys out there, tons of guys from a lot of teams that you're looking at that are like, man, it's hard to believe this many younger guys are hitting free agency this year, but we kind of should have anticipated this, right? With all the cap changes last year, contracts being restructured, the 2018 NFL draft was a pretty darn good one in terms of its overall depth. So now you're coming up on just those contracts expiring. Plus last year, a lot of guys signing 1-year contracts to get to this year with the salary cap rising. Man, it's shaping up to be a really good year, I think, to be a buyer on the free agent market. So for the Denver Broncos, you have already a really good roster core. Now you can add guys to that core to make your roster even more impressive. And of course, everybody's looking at what are they going to do at quarterback, but there's a lot of other positions on this team. And we know that, and you all know that. So there's depth in free agency this year, and the Broncos need to take advantage.
And it pays to have really good flexibility in terms of salary cap, not to mention it will rise a little bit with all the betting, with all, see the market deals that have happened there. So it'll rise to over 200 million. Like, that's ridiculous there. So Broncos country, let us know down below who you would like the Broncos to take a look at in the free agency market, potentially at the nickel position, maybe some more depth at the outside cornerback position. But coming up here in just a moment, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear a preview for the Super Bowl between Locked On Rams and the Locked On Bengals podcast, a special preview from the local experts here live at Radio Row, something that we shot here this week. You get to check out a game preview from them. Obviously, they're very excited for their teams. You get that coming up here in just a moment. But before we get to that, Broncos country, let me tell you about Built Bar, the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Ladies and gentlemen, Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. The bars, they're healthy for you. They contain 100% milk chocolate. Plus, when you take a bite into them, they're soft and they are easy to chew. And ladies and gentlemen, you can go to built.com BillBar.com here today to see the 9 amazing flavors that they have, the original flavors, plus the occasional limited time flavors that they have to offer to viewers here of Locked On Broncos. Be sure to go check out what flavors that they have there. But Built Bar is also great. If you need extra fuel to get you through your day, Built Bar has you covered because the bars contain 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. Ladies and gentlemen, that is tremendous value for something that contains 100% milk chocolate. Plus, ladies and gentlemen, you can go to built.com today. And when you go to checkout, if you use promo code LOCK15, that's going to get you 15% off your next order at built.com. Once again, promo code LOCK15 gets you 15% off at built.com.
We are here in LA for the Super Bowl. I'm here with longtime host Trey Wingo, who is now the chief trends ambassador.
Trends officer and brand ambassador. It's a mouthful. Shout out to Allie Bronson. Allie, what's happening? Hope you're doing well.
Hi, Allie. We have a great matchup this week. We got Rams, we got Bengals. We also have great ways to bet. So 2,000 ways to bet on the Super Bowl with Caesars.
All kinds of prop bets, everything from first touchdown, coin toss. Will there be a defensive player score? It's only happened twice in NFL history. So that was one of the first real exotic prop bets in Caesars Palace history. They bet on the fridge to score, and he did in the third quarter. And to Mike Ditka's undying shame, Walter Payton did not score in Super Bowl 20.
And you, because you have moved away from the beast at ESPN, I would assume have a little bit more freedom to do some of this stuff.
I have freedom. Freedom is a wonderful thing. It's wonderful, and the funny thing about this, working with the folks at Caesars, a lot of the people in Vegas, so for me, it's basically doing the same stuff I always did, just doing it with a different place with familiar faces.
What was Super Bowl week like for you in your other life?
Hectic. You know, I mean, whether it was getting up super early to come do the radio show from 6 to 10 or 5 to 9 when we're in Central Time, or God forbid 4 to 8, you know, that was difficult. But we did NFL Live every day, and you know, all the stuff, and post-game and pre-game Super Bowl stuff. So it's all really the same. We're just sort of maneuvering around in a different platform.
There has been a lot of discussion this week with Joe Burrow and Matthew Stafford. The quarterbacks always get the love, but it does seem apt in this game because the Rams go quote unquote all in for Matthew Stafford, and then we have Joe Burrow, he is evolving right in front of our faces. Yeah. It seems like, I don't know if you believe
something for not to cross promote, but I wrote something for Facebook about that. But one of the things that was great about doing the draft every year, that man right there, Jim Carr, was my chief researcher for the draft. And he was also the chief researcher for Monday Night Football, so I'm happy to be working with him again. And we came across these great nuggets, Jim would. And I remembered this, and Jim sent this to me. This was an evaluation of Joe Burrow when he was 9 years old. Now I want you to listen to this, seriously. Burrow played on a travel AAU basketball team, and one game, his team was down by 8 points with 30 seconds to left. His coach said, Tom Vanderven said, "We thought it was over, but then Burrow took over, scoring 9 consecutive points, including 7 straight foul shots. I'd never seen anything like it. It was then that I knew he was different from everyone else. I couldn't believe the poise under pressure he had of a 9-year-old. Vanderven is a professor of sociology at Ohio University. After the game, I told his parents that Joe had the kind of qualities that you'd find in cops and first responders, and also serial offenders. He has the kind of qualities that people have, where his pulse probably doesn't change no matter the situation he finds himself in, whether he's mowing the lawn or pulling people from a fire." So Joe could either be Dexter or a really good quarterback. So thank God he's using his powers for good and not evil.
Well, he had to pull the Bengals from the jaws of a fire in the second half agained Kansas City, and he did it against Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. Pretty remarkable in what we've seen in just his second year.
Yeah, well, I've been very consistent about one thing all year, from week 1 to now. The only team that can beat the Chiefs would be the Chiefs. And they certainly beat themselves in that game, but that's Burrow's quality. If you give him an opportunity, he'll take it. Like, look at the divisional game against the Titans. He was sacked 9 times, and it was a low-scoring game, and Ryan Tannehill had the ball with a minute something to play to maybe potential game-winning points. Instead, he throws a tip ball that's intercepted, and Burrow. So he's never going to be the most stats-driven guy. I mean, even though he threw for 4,600 yards and 34 touchdowns, he's the guy that can make it not work for 3.5 quarters, but if you give him that opportunity, he'll take it in the fourth quarter.
As we look at some of these props for the game, anything stand out to you in terms of what you might like here?
Well, we haven't had a safety since Super Bowl 48. That was the first snap of the game for Peyton when the center snapped it over his head, and Noshawn Moreno had to cover it up in the end zone. And this is the longest stretch we've gone without a safety in Super Bowl history. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, maybe betting on the idea that a safety is scored might be a good one.
You're probably getting some nice long odds on that too. There's a lot of stuff on this that I like. Were you ever the kind of person that's like, I'm going to bet on the coin toss?
Oh, yeah. But actually, that is the most surprise. It's heads plus 100, tails plus 100.
Yeah.
Although, what is it, Jimmy? Is it 29-26? Tails has been in favor of it, and we're on a run now.
So tails sometimes fails.
Tails sometimes fails, yes. And also, I think the last 7 guys that called tails have all lost. Isn't that what it is? Yeah, all lost. So they won the toss. They won the toss and lost the game. Yeah.
All right, so good for bettors, bad for the players.
Correct.
Which bettors don't really care about.
Also true.
Maybe you could fade the team that you think is going to win the coin toss.
Correct.
A lot of good stuff there. When you look at the outcome of the game,
yeah.
You don't have to make a pick, but if you want to, you can. What is the thing that you think? Okay, if this happens, Team X wins.
Listen, the best way I can describe it, I've been thinking about this a lot, is that the Rams know the weight of not winning. They've been here 4 years ago. A lot of those players, he knows how hard it is. The Bengals know none of that. They know none of that. All they know is we win. And they're all young. And sometimes it's better to not know than to know.
Yeah.
They are playing like on Madden easy mode. And the Rams are a better team. They're a better team. But this Bengals squad doesn't know any better. And sometimes that can be a powerful thing, a powerful force. Because if Sean McVay starts thinking about, well, I was here again last time and we messed it up, and Aaron Donald thinks about that time he busted through the gap, and Sony Michel hit him for a 45-yard gain that set up the only touchdown in that game. If they start thinking, I do not care.
Yeah. We're Trey Wingo, Radio Row in Los Angeles. A lot more fun to have.
Yeah.
The coaching carousel.
Yeah.
Is coming to a close with its spinning, but it's spun in a lot of ways this year that we did not predict.
9 openings.
And the Brian Flores lawsuit looms over all of this.
Correct.
What do you think the chances are we see meaningful change when it comes to NFL hiring practices there?
Well,
at least in the short term.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a tough one. Like the whole Lovie Smith thing, let's just take that for example. He was asked at his introductory press conference, he said, when did you know you were a candidate? He said, honestly, I'm not sure. And I think the answer to that is they really wanted to hire Josh McCown, but they knew that would look really bad.
Yeah.
So they decided to go another route. I've said this for years. The Texans should be relegated. Like, they are a disastrous franchise. I mean, just look at what they've done over the last few years. They traded away DeAndre Hopkins for a broken running back and a ball of wax. They let J.J. Watt walk. They did not play their quarterback for understandable reasons all year, then told their coach, go get him, and then they make him last less than a calendar year. Listen, I don't know if Brian Flores is ever going to coach again, and I think he's okay with that. I think Brian Flores is willing to be the Kurt Flood of NFL coaches. That's the analogy. A lot of people use another one. To me, that's the analogy that I come up with. Kurt Flood, for those that don't know, challenge the reserve clause in baseball. That if Brian Flores is willing to throw away his career, we will see meaningful change. But it doesn't start from here up. It has to start from the top down. And when we don't have changes in leadership who are looking at the way we do the hiring, I don't know if it's ever going to change. So I don't know if we can build from the bottom. We have to dig down from the top.
There are 30 teams not here.
Yeah.
Most of them pretty upset that they're not here. Some of them pretty happy to be picking at the top of the draft instead.
Yeah.
But the big offseason story is going to be what happens with Aaron Rodgers.
Yes.
And
just like last year.
Yeah, exactly. But we didn't know that this time last year. Yes. We did not really know, or at least publicly know, that there was this tension behind the scenes. Aaron Rodgers says things have gotten better, but we still don't know what his future is. After having had some information last year, some inside info on what was going on there, what is your feeling about where they stand right now?
My feeling is that I think that Aaron Rodgers has played his last game as a Green Bay Packer. And the weird part about it is, I think the Packers are okay with that. I really believe that. I mean, Andrew Brandt is a friend of mine who, of course, worked for the Packers organization for many years. And he's been saying this forever. The idea was to have Aaron Rodgers play 2 more years and then move Jordan Love in. And it certainly seems like that's the way things are heading. My only question to the Packers is, really, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? Like, it's worked once from Favre to Rodgers. But the idea that the Packers only made it to one Super Bowl if he's played his last game, and I'm including Aaron Rodgers in the statement when I say this, it is an organizational failure of the highest magnitude with a guy who was Mount Rushmore type level. Made it to 2 with Favre, who was throwing interceptions left and right. I mean, like, you lost an NFC Championship or divisional round playoff game against the Rams because he threw 6 interceptions in one game. Yeah. And, you know, he's supposed to be so risk averse and all that kind of stuff. But if he has played his last game, everyone in that organization, including Aaron, because he hasn't played well in a lot of those playoff games, has to say, how did we mess this up? Because you had a generational quarterback since 2008, and you got there once as a wild card.
The team has said we want him back. The president, Mark Murphy, recently said we want him back, and that the organization is aligned on that. But there is also a difference between saying we want him back and we want him back at a cost. There is always a cost associated with those comments.
Right. Well, it's like when someone says, "No, he's our guy." It's easy to say that in May. It's harder to say that in October. Right. Like when all these, when Trey Lance was drafted and the Niners moved up all those picks to get him, Jimmy G's our guy. For now. Yeah. Like there's always a hanging participle on those sentences, right? You say that now because it's in your best interest. Right. That doesn't mean it might change. Listen, I think they'd be crazy to try not to make it work, but I don't know if they can make it work.
If he says, okay, this is not working out, I think everyone would feel better if we moved on. And I was frankly shocked how fast fans after the loss were just sort of like, at a certain point, what are we supposed to do? Because they feel like you do, that they should have won more in all this time.
Correct.
So let's say Green Bay says, okay, we'll move you. What makes sense for each side? Is there a move that does make sense for each side?
Well, obviously a lot of Mahomes are there, and Derek Carr's playing pretty damn well. I mean, like, if he does go to Denver, that's automatically the best quarterback division by a mile.
Yeah.
And
one of the best we'd ever had.
Yes, and I don't think it's going to be that easy for him. Now, granted, Denver has a good defense and they have some weapons. They're going to have to give up some of that if they're getting Aaron Rodgers. So I don't know. Like, suddenly Tampa Bay is interesting.
Yeah.
Right? That's interesting. New Orleans might be interesting. I think suddenly there are a lot more.
Don't say that too loud. Ross Jackson might hear you hosting Locked On Saints.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that later. So there's all kinds of possibilities. Both. So the Denver thing, I think people are trying to put 2 and 2 together, but sometimes that doesn't make 4; it makes 5 or 6. So if I were Aaron, I'd maybe think about moving some of those other.
Obviously, a lot of great insight from our local experts on the biggest stories here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The Rams-Bengals Super Bowl 56 is set for this weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On Broncos, your favorite podcasting provider here on YouTube. Make sure you follow or subscribe. And once again, Broncos Country, thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Both Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we appreciate you for tuning in. Take a time out of your day to listen to us talk all things Denver Broncos. Ladies and gentlemen, we have you covered every single day, all year long, because for the true Broncos fan, there is never an off season. We have you covered every single day. Sayre, my friend, great to see you here once again. We're back at it. Obviously, on Monday, the Super Bowl will be wrapped up by then. I'll be back from Los Angeles. I'll be cozy in my home studio. And then we're going to continue our free agency preview. But then the Broncos more likely will have their next defensive coordinator, my friend. Hey, hope you have a good one. Broncos Country, we'll see you next time for a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.